Hey everyone, welcome back. And in this video, we're gonna be taking a look at something super interesting with CSS, and that is the presence of pseudo elements, right? So far we have been using pseudo selectors, nth child and all that stuff, but actually CSS brings in pseudo elements as well. What does that mean? Pseudo stands for fake, and element is basically, what you're writing on the screen, right? So what does it really mean to be a fake element? Well, firstly, realize that this is just going to work with the elements which have an opening and a closing tag, right? By this, what I mean, it will not work, this strategy which we will be discussing, it will not work with input, it will not work with img, it will not work with pretty much like hr or br or any tag which is self-closing. So with that being said, what I want to do is I want to jump into my style sheet, and let's take example of this banner itself. So I'm going to have a banner here. I'm going to give it a color of purple. Let's hope that is visible, sort of. Give it a background of white. Why not? Right. And now what I want to do is I want to add pseudo elements to it. How do you add pseudo elements, or sort of how do you target pseudo elements? Is you say banner before, right? And yeah, one very quick thing, I think I missed it. You might see that some selectors use this double notation of double colons. Some might use single one, right? So what is the difference? Well, remember that first of all, whenever you're using double, a single is also valid, but not the other way around. For example, a double on this is not valid, right? The single colon is only valid here. Now, then why do we use double at all? Well, we use double to denote that the selector which we are using now is pseudo element, not a pseudo selector. By what do we mean by that? That means that this is actually sort of targeting a DOM element on the page itself. It's not really a DOM element, that's why the name pseudo, but it will behave like one. So let's just go ahead and give it a content property. I'm gonna explain now. Let's say hello world, right? And what we did is we just wrote a string right here, and magically it appears on the screen. Wow, I mean, we did not know that we can actually write with CSS now, did we? Because, we always assume that HTML is the one which shows the text and CSS is the one which, programs all the colors and layouts and all that stuff. But it is actually possible to write with CSS as well. So this is like one way of writing with CSS, right? Another thing which I can tell you is that before also exists. There's an after pseudo selector which also exists. So if you go ahead and write after here, you can say by world, right? So there's that. So if I go ahead and open this in a new tab and refresh this, and if we go down right here, I think we are zoomed in a lot on this page. Yep. So if I go ahead and select this hello world and by world, you can see right here, you can actually see in the DOM inspector, there is this before and after element, which you can now actually select, right? But you would not see these elements in regular tags by default unless you do not create them. And these elements, interestingly enough, will only appear as long as you have the content property. If I remove this content property, you can see the element not only just goes away, but it is not only visible, it is not also visible on the screen. So I can go ahead and give it a width of 200 pixel, height of 200 pixel, background, height of 200 pixel, background of red. Okay, it does not work. Let's just go ahead and do it here. Width of 200 pixel, height of 200 pixel, background of red. I can do all that stuff, but it will not appear on the page, if you do not give it a content, right? As soon as you remove that content, it disappears. If I remove this, it's gonna disappear, even if you give a display block, right? Display block right here. It will not appear as long as you do not give it a content attribute, content property. So there's that, right? Now, once you have given it a display block, width and height, it sort of like behaves like a similar element, right? You can resize it, you can, have fun with it, but obviously, it's still not a part of DOM, right? It's not a part of DOM. That means you cannot reach this element from the JavaScript world. This is an important thing. You cannot ever reach pseudo selectors from JavaScript world. So that is like one thing to keep in mind, right? So this is like before is a pseudo selector, after is also a pseudo selector, which gets injected just, if I refresh this page. So you can see right here, if I go ahead and target this hello world, before gets injected just as soon as we enter the element, and after gets injected just before the element exits, right? So there's that. There are multiple other, selectors which are pseudo elements, right? Remember, these 2 columns means pseudo elements, 1 column means pseudo selector. These things still work because of compatibility reasons, but you should always use double columns right here just to denote that, hey, that this is actually a pseudo element, not a pseudo selector. This is not a pseudo selector, right? This is a pseudo element you're targeting. Similarly, let's just go ahead and write banner, and I'm going to give this one a first letter, right? Interestingly enough. And I'm going to give this a text transform of lowercase. You can see that the hello worlds of the edge of the hello world suddenly turned lowercase. Now, if I go ahead and give it a, if I go ahead and turn this all hello world so that it's much more clear, you can see that the edge is small. Why? Because I said the first letter of the element, the banner, should be lowercase, right? And I can also have a first line right here, which is just going to target the whole thing. If we did not have this before, then you're going to see that it actually impacts the element itself. So there's that. So this is like how it works. There's one more interesting thing I would just like to discuss before we wrap up this video, and that is there is actually a way to add selectors on pseudo elements. And what do I mean by that? Let's see. Let's say if you want to have a hover effect on the pseudo element, then what you might think of doing is something like, hey, I have the banner before selector, and when I hover over this, what should happen is that the text transform lowercase, which is fine. But if you check this out, it will not work. Why? Because, you're targeting an element which does not exist on the DOM tree. But what you can do is you can go ahead and hover, you can get the state first, and then you can say, once I hover over this, the before state of this is gonna be, lowercase. And I know it sounds stupid that, this one works, the other one does not work. But yeah, I mean, if you want to target pseudo selectors, just sort of like try to put the pseudo, if you want to target the pseudo elements, try to put the pseudo selector before, right? So similarly, you can go ahead and let's see if we have, banner hover first letter as the pseudo selector, then also this will just work, right? So no need of having any JavaScript or anything if you just want to have these simple effects. So this is how, this all sorts of works out. So far you have seen that there are 2 sorts of selectors. The first one is actually pseudo selectors. The second one is actually pseudo elements. Pseudo elements consist of before, after, first letter, first sentence, first line actually, not first letter, first sentence. But yeah, there might be a couple or so, but you get the idea. That's how you use pseudo elements and pseudo selectors. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. In the next one, I'm going to cover an ATTR attribute, which is an interesting property, which sort of links your CSS with HTML world. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. I'm going to see you in the next one.